Today we have John Kennedy. Thank you so much for jumping on here. We were connected through LinkedIn, and I was really intrigued by the brain coach idea. I was talking to a friend of mine, Carrie, and he was talking about rehabilitation training that he's doing for TBI, and that's what I saw and was interested with you. And I wanted to get more information. So, if you don't mind, just do a little quick summary of who you are, where you come from.
Sure. So basically, my background for many, many years was as a consultant to large corporations. So I developed I guess what you call a proprietary methodology for getting operations back on track very quickly. And so we call it a project rescue specialist, right? So I would come in, there'd be a mess, I'd meet a new team, I'd pull everybody together around the process. Because if you can rely on a process, it frees people up to do better work. So I love doing that work. And then my brother returned from Iraq back in 2006, my brother David, and he pointed out the dangers of IEDs. Improvised explosive devices, as you know very well, that's your job, right? I mean,
Right.
is mailing these things. And my dad, I might have mentioned, was with EOD, Navy EOD 1 back in Pearl Harbor about 55 years ago. So it's always kind of been in my blood. And so I really looked into how we could possibly prevent casualties from IEDs. And the Marine Corps gave me an opportunity to do that. They had an event every year back in 2006 where they would invite contractors from all over the world to come in and experience a long weekend where they would inundate us with information about IEDs. So this is during the surge, lots. It was still, right? IEDs are pretty much the most devastating weapon against our guys, right? Because
Right.
in a full-on firefight, as you know, we can beat anybody, but they're so insidious. And so during this weekend, I kept thinking, how can I possibly make a difference in this battle? And what occurred to me finally, I was shaking hands with General Doug Stone at the last day base commander, and I just had this kind of a God wink, this kind of an intuition. What if we could improve the mental efficiency of these Marines to improve their intuition? And that came about because our guides through the event were all Marines who had survived IED attacks. And the consistent story was I started around this one street or this one alley. Something told me to go a different way. And so I did, but the guys behind me kept going and they got blown up. So why two Marines, similar demographics, similar training, similar ages, why does one have better what we would call intuition, not only sensing the danger, but actually acting on it? And I thought, I'm shaking hands with Doug's hand. I thought, so if I could do the same thing for the brain that I do for operations, maybe we could improve intuition, the ability to make better decisions under stress with better focus. At the time, and he was all over it. It just happened to be the right time because we were desperate for things to help. He helped me get my first contract embedded with the Marines. And the basis, though, for why this works is something called neuroplasticity, which is the incredible ability God has given us to change from stimulation. So you know very well, when you practice something over and over again, it becomes easier. That's because your brain is changing and forming the connections that are necessary to make that easier through repetition. And my hypothesis was if I can apply my methodology to the brain using neuroplasticity as a medium, maybe we could make a difference. So I actually created the field of applied neuroplasticity, which is basically applying this business process re-improvement approach to changing the brain. There's three components. One, we have to define what it is we want to do. So I spent a lot of time defining what specific cognitive skills we needed to improve intuition, and then robust stimulation. So at that time, research had come out of MIT that found that what they call robust stimulation will change our brain starting immediately, not in a week, not in a month, but immediately. And my definition of that robust stimulation is we need to stimulate the brain in a lot of ways simultaneously. So that means the parts of the brain critical to executive function, which is the kind of the framework I defined. At the same time, the connections to the real world, right? Because we want real world connections, which incidentally is why those digital brain training games, Lumosity and all those others, they don't really have real world improvements because you're not interfacing with the real world. You're only, interfacing with a phone basically. And so all those connections simultaneously, the cool thing about it is our brains will rewire around damage. This is why it's so effective for concussions, PTSD, even Alzheimer's. And the brain will change the fastest where it works the hardest. So we all have kind of a different makeup of cognitive skills, but we go through this training. The improvements are very, very fast because where we're struggling, that's where the brain will make those connections the fastest and the strongest. And so that hypothesis for that first experiment was something we didn't know was going to happen, right? I had 3 months embedded with the Marines where I had to develop these exercises. And during that time, it was a full, Department of Defense experiment, right? So we had a randomly chosen control group. We had before and after IQ tests, or actually cognitive skills tests. And then I got to choose the platoon I was going to work with. And I chose the platoon who was struggling the most, because if it could make any difference at all, I wanted to help these guys. So, a lot of issues. They'd lost 16 guys a cycle before. A lot of, PDS. They were failing a lot of their really important objectives. 3 guys had tried to commit suicide. The guys were really struggling. So 3 months later, I developed these exercises embedded with them, which, was an incredible experience for me to be able to actually embed with these guys, go through a lot of hang out with them when they're doing their training, wherever they were. But 3 months later, not only were now the best performing platoon in the battalion, but when they went through final pre-deployment training back at 29 Palms, the instructor said it was the best performance he'd ever seen by a platoon. So they went to Iraq, captured the most insurgents. But because of that, word spread. And so from there, the XO of that regiment took over MARSOC in Pendleton. So he brought me in. So I work with MARSOC. I work with, special operations. EOD was probably the most rewarding for me. I did a training at EOD TU1 in San Diego. It was kind of cool because on my slides, I got to show the equipment my dad was issued 50 years earlier, right? Basically swim trunks, depth gauge and a knife. And now these guys have so many, underwater things like, drones and, rebreathers and stuff. So that was really kind of cool to show the guys how far they'd come. But that was very meaningful for me. And of course, the results there phenomenal as well. So every military unit I worked with, incredible results. Scout Sniper program, probably one of the toughest in the military. And, I embedded with 2 classes at their schoolhouse, regimental schoolhouse. And the typical dropout rate was really like 30 to 40%, just because it's such a tough course. And the 2 groups that I was embedded with, only 1 drop per course and highest marksmanship scores ever at the schools, in unknown distance. So every group, when we make the brain faster and more focused, everything we do happens better. And so then from there, unfortunately, military funding got cut, about 10, 11 years ago, and I moved to the civilian sector. And so now I pretty much get to work with both ends of the spectrum. I get to work with really high performers like professional athletes, business people who are looking for an edge. And then what's very rewarding for me, I get to work with the other end of the spectrum, guys who are really struggling from concussions, from PDS, from strokes, from dementia, because when we train the brain to do what it needs to do, as opposed to just trying to fix things, really incredible improvements can happen.
Right. So what is it about the training and this that actually helps with PTS and I guess the cognitive ability of the brain following a concussion? So what's some of the feedback that you're getting from those Marines you trained or any of the individuals that had some sort of head trauma?
No, that's an excellent question. So it works in a number of different ways. And one of the reasons that it's so effective, I've had several neuroscientists kind of take a look at it, is because it's not isolated to one particular area. In fact, one of my neuroscientists from Northwestern said this could never have come from traditional medical research because it's very reductionist, right? They want to find one thing and try to fix that one thing, but this is very holistic. It's not a digital interface; it's an analog interface. So even in the exercises, we use eyes, ears, mouth, hands, and feet. So we make all those connections. And that intuition piece, I think, is what really helps with PTS. One young Marine that I worked with. So I volunteered a lot of time with Wounded Warrior battalions at each of the bases I was at. And one Marine in particular said, I used to go out to dinner with my wife. She'd pour ketchup on a burger and I'd freak out because I was just going back to the blood that I'd seen. He said, that doesn't happen anymore. It's like I anticipate and I can actually do the right thing so that doesn't happen. When we rebuild those connections, we also, actually part of the training really increases blood flow through the brain, which another neuroscientist from Harvard said this is huge for any kind of memory issues, because typically what happens, especially if we have some sort of physical damage, is the capillaries that are feeding the neurons shrivel and can die. But when we force that blood through again, we can rebuild those connections to the neurons and also create neurogenesis, actually create more neurons. And so it's kind of an overall improvement depending on where people are struggling. Concussions, that's a physical damage. Well, we can rewire around that. So those symptoms go away very quickly. I have a couple of clients now, elderly people with dementia.
Yeah.
And they've got some feedback the other day from one I've been working with for several months. And the feedback from a friend of mine they referred me to said it was amazing. He said he's sharper now than he was a year ago. One of
awesome.
I love it. One of my favorite clients, Grace, is a very accomplished, she was an opera singer, actually. She was in New York auditioning for an opera. And unfortunately was in a tree, taking a selfie with her boyfriend, fell out of the tree, landed on her head from 20 feet up. So right on the center of her head, right? So the corpus callosum is where the right brain and left brain connect. But she was in a coma for 4 months. When I started working with her, she could barely speak and barely use her hands at all. Well, it's been a while now. It's probably been almost a year now. I've been working with her on and off. And now she can play the piano. She can sing. She's working on her writing and walking ability. So again, when incredible things can happen.
Right. I lost you there for a second. I was just hoping you'd go back. You said that she's now doing the piano, and that's when it cut out. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, it's because we're rebuilding those connections that were there before, especially right brain, left brain connections. Both her hands are operating very well. She can actually now sit, and it's kind of cool because for a long time, she was trouble reading music, but you put her at the piano, and because now she has the connections to her fingers regenerated, she would just play.
Right.
Beautiful stuff. So now she can sing. We work on her voice. We want to always work the areas where we struggle the most, and that's where the changes happen the fastest.
Oh, so these exercises, I was just going to ask you, what are some of the exercises that we're talking about that you do for these individuals? Because I know I tried one, and I don't know if that's just one of them or you have multiple, because I know you mentioned neuroprimer too. So I was just going to start at the beginning and then maybe work my way to the neuroprimer.
Yeah. And basically that's it. We start with just symbols on a piece of paper, right? We want it to be so simple that a fourth grader with learning disabilities can do it, or a Navy SEAL can do it, right? It's very, very simple, but it's all about making decisions. And as you experienced, to make those decisions, you had to do them out loud, right? So using eyes, ears, and mouth. You're visually cueing on each of the symbols, very, very simple decisions, but then we made them harder. We translated color to fruit, for example. We engage your hands, which is very important, because now not only are we engaging the longer neurons from your brain to your hands, but we're also engaging now both sides of your brain, because the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body and vice versa. So just doing that very, very simple exercise, you're now stimulating all parts of the brain and memory simultaneously. And the last one you finished with, where you did the tapping as well as the decisions as fast as you could, that's actually, we call the 1 minute neuroprimer. And basically, you can do that anytime during the day, before you go out on patrol, before you write a report, before you study. And obviously, we build on that. So what we do is, if we keep meeting, we continue to make harder and harder decisions using those same basic symbols. And we engage your legs as well. So we get the longer neurons to your legs going. This is huge for athletes, soldiers, anyone it relies on their feet. And eventually we move to a couple of harder variations. One is something very similar, but we also integrate numbers. The goal is to make your brain process more information as fast as you are with the very simple ones. You'll also notice a very important part of my training is, one, I try to be positive, but also I told you don't to stop for mistakes, right? So many training programs, it's all focused on being accurate. The problem with that is, one, it raises stress and anxiety. But the other thing, a lot of times we make mistakes, not because we want to or even meant to. It's because something we call a brain hiccup. Actually, there's a psychologist, Gary Klein, that did a lot of work in this in the past. And basically, when you're under pressure, you're going to say the first thing that comes to your mind, whether it's correct or not. So we don't care about mistakes. And so what we care about is processing speed, which is huge. When you can process information faster, it gives you that anticipation edge that no matter what environment you're in, your brain is primed and ready for it. So that neural primer that we ended with, we build on that. We have others that will increase your anticipation, right? Where you have to look ahead to something. Mm-hmm. And we always are trying to overload your brain so that it's doing so many things at the same time that you cannot think about it. You have to just let it go and let it go into the unconscious, which is where we can create what we call flow state, or being in the zone, where your brain is operating very, very efficiently, but you're not even thinking about it.
Right.
There's another exercise we do add later on, depends on this, because I always customize, right? Wherever people, what their goals in life are, but also where they're struggling. So we always try to overcome where they're struggling. We have another exercise we use. It's basically a puzzle. So, the one you experience is just symbols on a piece of paper. This is actually a puzzle. It has 5 plastic pieces and a set of shape cards, right? There's a lot of games out there like this. The goal, of course, is you have to put those pieces together to look like the shape card. Now, we typically address any problem we've never seen before with trial and error, right? We'll trial and error, experiment this, experiment that. It's kind of a very slow way of learning. Whereas the whole purpose, and it can take people, up to 5 to 10 minutes to do the very first one of these puzzles. The goal is to take that whole solution process. So we have to break the information down, think through what we want to do with it before we execute on it. We developed and actually teach a very specific piece orientation placement process so that eventually with these puzzles, you can solve any problem in the deck in less than 10 seconds as opposed to less than 10 minutes. And the cool thing is, through neuroplasticity, that same process applies to everything else. So if you're running a meeting, if you have to scan the environment, if you have to, develop a report or anything, all those different tasks that have a lot of different types of people, different people or items that have to be synthesized to be accomplished efficiently, your brain will take over and start to do that unconsciously. So efficiency improves tremendously regardless of what environment you're in.
I noticed when I was doing it, when I first ran through it, it seemed like my brain and mouth were on the same item, whether it be right, red, left, yellow, it was like wherever I was looking, that's where my brain was at. But when I implemented the tapping aspect of it, it did seem I slowed down a smidge at first, but I was able to be mentally further along than where I was visually, if that makes sense. So it reminded me a lot of, there's a phrase that we always use, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And that's similar to a flow state too, because once I started getting the timing down to where I was ahead of myself, I was actually able to like then go faster because I was
Yes.
already seeing what was coming. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I did it for a few days after until I got a bit swamped here at work. And after that, I got distracted. That's usually how I go. But I was noticing an improvement for sure, which was helping me in a lot of ways. Like
Yeah.
it helped me with anxiety because I hate reading in front of people. But every day, one of the things that I do is I'll do a daily safety brief, and I have to read it to in front of all these guys, and they're all for the most part EOD techs. So there's if you misspeak or say anything wrong, you're getting it afterwards. So it definitely helped me because I was usually a few words ahead. So I found it very applicable to what I was doing.
Great. Great. Well, and that's the thing, right? So when you first add the hands, it is more work for your brain, but then obviously those connections get faster and stronger. You release yourself. And then the next time, I'd love to take you to another one. We're actually going to improve that where you actually focus on something at the end of the line. So then all those regular decisions become unconscious. The other thing that you'll find, so I work with a lot of business people and they have to give presentations. And I don't know about your style, but this one guy told me, I had to give this big presentation every, like a couple times a week, right? So I would go through it, make sure I memorize it the night before, then I'd run through it in the next day. He said, I don't do that anymore. He said, I'm so quick on my feet now. I just review the information and then I can give my talk without even reading it. Because I know what I need to say and I can pick up on the reactions from the audience and I can direct it to be more effective to them without worrying about what I'm saying.
Right. And then that
So
removes a lot of the anxiety related
yes,
to those situations and environments. And I don't know about everybody, I can just speak for me, but when my anxiety starts getting irritated, it's a slippery slope. It's either I got to put a
yes,
pin in that for a minute and like that's where it's stopping. Because if I allow that little bear to get bigger, it just gets massive and overwhelming. And then all
yeah.
of a sudden I get really uncomfortable.
Right. Well, and you'll find, one of the reasons people, because I work with a lot of people with anxiety and depression and so forth, and one of the reasons people get anxious is they get overwhelmed, right? It's just too much
Yeah.
to think about. But when your brain is more efficient and you get down in that flow state, then the anxiety goes away because it's not holding you back.
You mentioned the legs when you add the leg movement. So is that like one of the last stages to this, or because we didn't quite get to that?
No, we didn't. And I always kind of time it. So, like with an athlete, we would probably do it sooner, right, than
Right,
most people
right,
because you're working on the brain stuff. But it's definitely something we add. There's a couple things we do. So one is with the legs, very important. In fact, next time we meet, I can certainly take you through the legs because what we have you doing is we want your brain doing one thing, right, making decisions. You want your hands doing something and your legs doing something completely different. So now this complete cross of connections from your
right.
brain throughout your body is doing different things. And same thing, right? It starts out, people will struggle a little bit in the beginning and then at the end. Although one fun thing with the legs, right? So when we do the legs, we actually step in the direction of the arrows. And every once in a while, if I think people can handle it, I'll have them step in the opposite direction of the arrows. And there was one year, several years ago, I trained the soccer team, women's soccer team for University of North Carolina, right? So one of the
Right.
top women's soccer teams in the country. And they could not do it at all. A couple months later, I was working with some Marines, and they got it. The Marines, because they're used to marching, and they're the only ones who ever got going the opposite. But that's one way we do it, because we really want to create. If you remember, there was a workout program years ago called what was it called? Well, it was all about muscle confusion, right? Where you move the muscles in different ways. Well, we want to do the same thing with the brain, because the more
Right.
different ways we're having the brain work at the same time, that's where all those connections become faster and stronger. The other thing we add later on too is a metronome, right? So with a metronome, when you have to make your decisions in time with the metronome, one, it actually helps you, with that timing, right? You really have to time. This was huge for like the Marine Corps rifle and pistol teams I work with, because for them, instead of tapping like we did, we do a trigger pull, because that's ultimately what we're going to do is pull a trigger. And with the metronome, they learned very quickly how much time they actually had between shots in a match,
Right.
right? They didn't rush anymore because they were timing the metronome. But the other thing the metronome does is when we speed it up, it simulates a very stressful environment, right? So typically if we get stressed, we get overwhelmed, we might experience anxiety, as you mentioned, or something. But when you can make fast, accurate decisions under the pressure of the metronome, everything gets really smooth. And so you're actually creates that environment, which obviously, for combat or for anything other situation where you have to make fast decisions under pressure, it just trains the brain to do that much better.
That's awesome. I like that. Director of Mental Performance Institute. So what is your institute doing currently, and what are you looking to do in the future?
Yeah, good question. So basically, I pretty much have done the training. It's mostly been me, but I created the institute a few years ago because I speak at like some international brain disorders conferences and mental, brain rehab conferences. And I felt at first it gave me a little more credibility, but actually we're actually using it now to certify other people. So we've developed a certification program. So anyone who wants to do this within their own organization or even on their own as a business, the Institute now can certify them to do what I do. And one of the reasons for that is we just want to help more people. I mean, I've probably worked with, starting especially with the military where I did large groups over the last 15 years, probably close to 10,000 people. And every single person has experienced improvements, but it's just me. So the purpose of the Institute is to be able to train other people to do what I do, just so we can help more people. And it's also, we do a lot of research. Fortunate. So I get requests all the time to write scientific articles, right? Which I don't like writing scientific articles. I need to. And fortunately, my daughter Tyler right now is a junior at Hope College up in Michigan. And that's what she's majoring in, psychology and neuroscience.
Oh, wow.
She's been very helpful to me. And she actually is going through courses on how to write these articles. So the fun thing for me will be actually writing an article with her. And then we'll be able to get our findings out there. And hopefully that will be able to influence positively more people as well.
Oh, that's exciting. Father-daughter moment. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But she's the best. I mean, she's kind of, so she's 20. She's she was like 5 or 6. She's kind of my first guinea pig when we were working on these. And so she's been really helpful. She's led some classes. She's actually the world's fastest on that exercise you did, that speed drill you did at the end.
How fast does she do it in?
She does that with the tapping in 11 seconds.
What? Just for compare, I think mine was like 50 something. So
58, yeah. So you actually did pretty well. You were around a minute. So the first goal is to get to a minute, which you did. I'm looking at your record of 58 seconds, which is pretty good for your first session. And obviously, the more you practice, the faster you get. But for her to go that fast, she's actually looking ahead 2 or 3 rows.
She just
sees what we're trying to develop.
Yeah, she sees the whole page at one time.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what we want, right? So you're looking out on a field of information. You want to be able to take it all in and then selectively focus on what you want to execute on. And that's one of the things we try to train as well. But yeah, I'm not even close.
Well, I am, as long as it's okay with you, I'd like to attach the arrow sheet to some of my creatives that are released so people have a visual of what we're discussing.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll tell you the problem with that, and nothing wrong with that, is that most people look at it and they have no idea what it is. It's kind of like if you were to go to the gym and the guy says, "I want to get stronger," and the trainer points to the barbells on the dumbbells on the floor and go, "What are those? Chunks them out. They're not going to do anything." It's how you do it that actually makes the change. You're certainly welcome to put it up there, but also they can reach out to me and I can send them some information on it as well.
That's what I was going to ask next. How would someone get a hold of you to get more information about this?
Well, the Institute website is mentalperformanceinstitute.org. It's not a com, it's a .org. So mentalperformanceinstitute.org. They can reach out to me via email at john@combatbraintraining.com. Now, the combatbraintraining.com website is just a placeholder right now. So they can always go there. There's actually a link where they can email me, but also set up a Zoom conference call if they'd like. So if they'd like to really discuss it in deeper, there's a link right on that placeholder where they can set up a Zoom link and we can just meet using the calendar. So those are probably the two best. For information, it's the mentalperformanceinstitute.org. To contact me, it's the combatbraintraining.com page.
Okay. Awesome. And yeah, I'll add every bit of that into the show notes so it'll be easy for anyone to get. I've been asked, where are these show notes? So if you look on to, I don't know wherever you watch it at, either Spotify, Apple Podcast, or if you go to YouTube, if you just click the ... for the more information below there, it'll have all the information to the show notes. It'll have your email address. I'll have links. Anything in there that's been provided by you will be in there.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Awesome. So that covers basically everything that I had on my agenda, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about or discuss that maybe we haven't touched on yet?
Just maybe leave your listeners with some encouragement. A lot of the people that I work with, they're just discouraged, right? They've tried everything. They've worked with the medical approaches, and they just really struggle and they get down a little bit. But I want them to know that with this type of training, they can improve wherever they're struggling in their lives. And I work with families and kids as well. And it's just, I love it just because it's just so encouraging to people. So just, I guess that leaving with that is don't give up hope, right?
Right. And
there's hope for
on
sure.
on that note, I had another episode with a guy named Kerry, and in that episode, he was dealing with some cognitive rehabilitation stuff. And that's what he said. He said, at first he was really disheartened because he was doing puzzles that his kid was doing and he was struggling with it. And he's like, but after applying himself and actually using his brain in those uncomfortable ways that have now become a struggle, he got a lot better and a lot faster at it. So that's why I think there's a huge connection between what you're doing, what he did, and working with our brains, and not get I feel like it's like our bodies, if we get stagnant and we just keep doing the same things and keep not doing a whole bunch of other things, it's like our bodies get sluggish and slow or tight and we get injured. And I think the same with our brain. We got to keep it sharp. And I'm still stuck on the fact that your daughter can read out 128 arrows, different colors in 11 seconds. That's fabulous.
Yeah. You know what I'll do? I haven't put up here, but I'll actually send you. So that's the basic. We have another harder variation of arrows, and I'll send you a video of her doing those in about 13 seconds.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. That's awesome. That's a sharp mind.
If you practice, it's, if you want, I don't know if you ever get that fast, but if you keep practicing that speed drill we ended with, and let's move it again, because I'd love to take you through some more. You'll be surprised at how fast you'll get.
I don't know with my Southern accent if I can speak that fast. And I didn't misspeak, but earlier I said we were connected by LinkedIn. We were connected by Abigail Manning and LinkedIn.
Yes,
Abigail Manning, she is fabulous. And if if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. She's an awesome, powerful woman. I really enjoyed that chat as well as this chat. And thank you so much for sharing and doing what you're doing and helping our community. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for what you're doing over there.
Oh yeah. And on that, if the internet is a little bit bad for those who are listening, I apologize. We are struggling with internet in Ukraine, but getting better.